Welcome into another SC Checks In, presented by First Texoma National Bank. Today, we're going to step outside the box a little bit. We are joined today by Jay Lindly, the voice of the Savage Storm. Traditionally, we are joined by former student athletes and people who have gone into, who've stayed in the athletic realm like that. Jay, on the other hand, is an alum of Southeastern who got his first ties here covering the sports. Jay, welcome in. How you doing today?
Doing good, man. Doing good.
A little weird being on this side of the interview.
It is. It is awkward to say the least.
Well,
I'm not accustomed to answering questions. I don't think I would make it well like in politics.
Most interviewers have a hard time being interviewed. But I'll try not to make it too difficult on you. Out of the box, because the thing I like to learn about people, and full disclosure, Jay and I have known each other for since we were in school here together, kind of got our starts covering Southeastern sports and working with them together. And, but the people who don't know you very well, how did you end up at Southeastern?
Well, initially, and a variety of reasons. One, not that far from my hometown of Wright City. Two, my dad, my uncles, cousins, they all came to Southeastern. As a matter of fact, it kind of paired up well. I had academic scholarships to Southeastern. My cousin was transferring from Carl Albert Junior College to Southeastern, so I had someone to stay with off campus. He and a bunch of our other friends, guys like Ren Baker, who's an alum, now the athletic director at North Texas. So they were all coming here, and I had, so friends were here. Academic money was here. And then initially, whenever I went to college, I wanted to coach. I wanted to coach baseball. And that's, Southeastern's known very well. I mean, their safety program obviously known, but their education and coaching program, there's a ton of coaches across Southeastern Oklahoma and North Texas that are Southeastern alum.
So you come here, you initially want to coach, and I've heard the story before, but talk a little bit about how you made the transition from wanting to coach to moving over into communication.
Let's just say that Mike Matheny burst my bubble. Let's just say that. The living legend. What it came down to was and I'd kind of framed things up well. A lot of people don't. When you go into college, you think you know what you're going to do. And I thought I knew. So I'd already laid down the groundwork for a hyper degree and a history degree. But I had started dabbling in communications anyway. I'd done public address whenever I was in high school. So I was kind of already familiar with it a little bit. But then I wanted to coach, and I talked to Matheny after my sophomore year about being a GA. And I mean, love Matheny to death. He just was point blank that he reserved that for former players only. And at that point in time, in my head, I never wanted to coach high school. I watched my dad coach high school. I've watched my two cousins coach high school. I've got two younger cousins that are now coaching high school. And I just never wanted to do that. I wanted to be a college coach. And so I started thinking to myself, how can I stay around sports? What can I do to stay around sports? And obviously, my face is made way more for radio than it is for television. And at the time, Dr. John Allen Hendricks was the head of the communications department at Southeastern. He's now down at Stephen F. Austin, still stay in touch with him. And, really the transition was relatively easy. I'd already done some things on the campus radio station. And I had this idea to do a sports show, and then you got involved with that. I think that's about the time you showed up at Southeastern, actually. And you and I meshed really well, and we started that. And then I wanted to do play-by-play. And at the time, KLBC held the rights to Southeastern Sports. And there were a lot of games that they weren't doing in the spring, and particularly with my love, baseball. And so with baseball and softball, and that's very easy to do. I mean, let's face it, there's 50 games a year. It's very difficult for small local radio stations to cover that much. And it left a gap. And, in doing so, KLBC granted the university granted, I guess, myself, the ability to go and do those games on the college radio station. And then, turned around and I went to John Allen Hendricks. And it's funny because John Allen was very much a bean counter. And, if you're going to sit there and you're going to tell him that we have to have a board op, we have to have $3,000 worth of equipment, we have to have this, and this to make it happen. And so I come in and I tell him, and he goes, well, you can go sell sponsorships around it, and, we'll discuss it. He was very pragmatic. And so I went out in 1 week and I doubled the amount of money that we needed to make it happen. And I came back, and it's still funny to this day. I still joke with Mark Webb, who of course is now on campus, and Mark has worked with First United Bank and Shamrock Bank locally in the marketing department. I always joke with Mark that he's literally the first advertiser I ever sold. I walked into First United long before it is what it is now. And Mark signed up, and then I was able to get a few more people on. And that paid for year one. That paid for the equipment that I had to buy. That paid for the board op that I had to have in the studio. And it just kind of took off from there. And it's funny because I go back and I still have, now people our age that are in this business will probably know what this is. You'll know what this is. Anybody 25 and younger will not have a clue what this is. But I remember the old mini disc players, and I used to get up on top of the press box at Paul Laird and have a microphone, 2 rocks, 2 rosters, and would sit on top of the press box because I didn't want anyone to hear how bad I was actually doing it. But then I'll go back, and I still have those, and I'll listen to them. And you may remember there was I don't know where it ranks in Southeastern history. I know it was the longest, at that point in time, it was like the longest pass play of the season. And I want to say they may have been playing Northeastern State. And, Romar Crenshaw, who's just all over the Southeastern record book, and another McCurtain County guy like myself. And he catches one over the middle, and he sprints to the edge, and he turns it upfield, and he's gone like 76, 78 yards. And I remember coming into the sports show on Monday and playing that highlight and being so proud of that highlight. And now I'm 20 years later, I'm like, man, that was so amateur hour. It's bad. I sometimes go back and listen to some of the old stuff just to go, you're not as bad as you're not as, because there are games, and you know this about me, I'll walk away from a broadcast. I can only think of one game that I've done, and at this point I've done probably over 500 football games. I can only think of one that I walked away from and said, nailed it. Like I can't help but be that, I don't know, tedious about it. And so it's kind of fun sometimes to go back and realize that, people always talk about my voice and how gravelly it is and recognizable. Well, if you go back and you listen to me when I was young, and I couldn't mimic it today if I wanted to, but for some reason I had like this nasally sound, like I didn't want my voice to, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was like I listened to too many Yankees do play-by-play, because predominantly there are a ton of Yankees in this business, but it's weird. You go back and you listen to stuff and you go, man, you've really progressed. And it's really no different, in my opinion, than any other job you do. When you start out, you're truly an amateur. And if you want to get good at it, you study people who do it really well. And you don't necessarily mimic them. You just take what they you take what you like about what they do and you incorporate it into what you're doing, and you just kind of go from there. And I'm by no way, shape, or form where I want to be, professionally speaking. From a technical broadcast standpoint, like I said, I still walk away from games going, God, why didn't I do it this way, or why didn't I do it that way?
Do you feel like occasionally, you went into college with such a mindset on coaching? That's what you were going to do. You ever feel like you made the transition, but maybe not completely mindset? You go back and listen. You do a lot of things that coaches do in the coaching field, but you applied it to what you're doing now.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I'll say this. I think really more so at the high school level than the collegiate level. I mean, at the collegiate level, when you are the voice of a university, you get carte blanche. I mean, and you're going to forge and form relationships. And, predominantly during my time here, the two main sports I deal with, or three, I guess you could say, football and then men's and women's basketball. Of course, Bob, the oddity about this is my main job at Keystone Broadcasting and Mix 96.1 doesn't allow me to do the one sport that I love the most, which is baseball. And to me, calling baseball is such an art form because it's so long play that you can have an off night on a basketball game and there's so much action that it kind of covers it up. And you can have an off day even on a football game, but you've got a stat coming every 40 seconds. Baseball, if you're not prepared, it's going to show. Anybody listening to that broadcast is going to know you weren't prepared. But at the college level, it's like, we've had a coaching change in football during my time here, but I'm still good friends with Bo Atterbury. Atterbury was in college at the same time I was. Obviously, have a good relationship with Tyler Fenwick. On the basketball front, Coach Grover and Coach Green, they've been there the entire time I've been here. Matter of fact, Grover, he's been there so long, he literally stepped in right as I was graduating college. So it's a little bit different. Whereas at the high school level, you deal with so many different coaches, and you don't have the ability to instantaneously get information. So and what I mean by that, and you know this, but what I mean by that is Southeastern's playing Harding. I can go hop on Harding's website and I can get almost anything I want. And then I can get on the phone with Billy Morgan, their play-by-play guy, and get a little more information. Whereas at the high school level, you do a lot of research on your own, and you're very dependent upon coaches to give you that information. And being out of a coaching family and having I don't want to say the rhetoric, but having the coach speak, that gets me a long way with those guys, because they know that when I walk in to do a game, and I do play-by-play for Sherman, but and I know we'll touch on this after a while, but I called like 46 state football championships. I dealt with Alan Trimble, who passed away at Jones. At Jinx. I dealt with so many different coaches who are dealing with me for like one time only. And to be able to get to them in a very personal level and have trust instantaneously, that's very important. And I think that's probably the one thing from a coaching standpoint. And I still prepare. I still prepare like I think a coach would. I watch film. I try to keep up with what Fenwick's doing in practice during the week, just so I can see, they're going to throw they may use this little wrinkle. And then that way I'm prepared for it when I'm calling the game, and here comes this fake punt that nobody knew was coming, but I've seen it all week long on film. And that I guess it would be the one way that I would say that there's some similarities there, at least on that part of the job.
Okay, so you mentioned Bob Sullins just a little bit ago. Let's back up because I know he was instrumental in your transition from college into your professional field. Talk a little bit about moving from getting your degree and then moving into the radio world as a job.
I'll say Bob has been very instrumental in almost every step of my career. I will also say that I can't state enough to anyone who's watching this that's an undergrad, networking is so important. That's honestly, and I know some of the academics on the Hill are going to cringe when I say this. Sometimes that's more important than your grades. Because I graduated with honors, but I'll honestly say I've never been great at networking. It's just not, it's weird. I'm good at it in some instances and others I'm not. I always felt like I was intruding. Like there's several play-by-play guys I know at a very high level. One, I'm not going to name drop because that's not my thing. But two, if I'm busy, how busy are those guys? You know? And so that's kind of how I look at it. But Bob, I did my internship whenever Bob was the play-by-play voice for Sherman. And I did it. I did my internship under Bob. And whenever that ended, Bob, I didn't know anything about Bob at that time. And he's like, well, I got this station in Atoka. I need to do a morning show. And I'm going into my last year of college. So I said, sure, I'll do it. And then, you know, happen chance, I do that for 2 months. And he's got a little AM radio station in Medill that I didn't know about. Well, the guy there up and quits. And then Bob's like, I need you to run this station. Well, I'm 22 years old. I'm thinking I'm going to be the next Howard Stern at this point. Going and running a classic country station in Medill does not fit in that career path, you know. But I went and did it. And to be honest, it was probably the best learning experience. I mean, you and I both know this. You having gone through communications, there's a lot of guys that I thought were really talented in our classes that are no longer in this business. And they're no longer in this business because maybe they tried to go too big. Maybe they didn't have the connections. They didn't. And for me, I got this AM radio station. I got the keys to the joint and literally was told, do with it what you will. And then I turned around and a guy that, you know, some alum will know, Dr. Bob Hayes, passed away a couple of years ago. He was over an advertising sales class, and I had John Allen Hendricks there still at Southeastern, and I relied a ton on those two guys in particular. The sports stuff was easy. Running a radio station was really difficult, especially a standalone AM station. And so, you know, he got me my start. Long story short, it didn't last. I was there for 4.5 years. You know, quite frankly, you get to a point in your career, you need to do something else. And at that point in time, I would have been 27, 28. And I seriously considered going into coaching at that time. I was really kind of tired of media. And my dad, who taught at Boswell, got me involved in subbing down there and helping him coach girls softball. And I realized really, really fast that education was not the place for me. And I went sprinting back to media. And at the time, there was a high school sports website called Coach's Aid. It worked out. Griffin Communications, which is the largest media company in Oklahoma, leased that website. That allowed me to go to work for one of their subsidiaries, which was Radio Oklahoma Network, which then allowed me to have a syndicated show, do network sales, really give me the education, the second education, if you will, to do what we've done with Southeastern, because I'm not sure we would have been able to do what we've done to this point had I not gotten that education. And Tim West, who was my boss at Radio Oklahoma, he actually owns the company now, and he and I stay in good contact. Tim was actually one of the first guys to start sports radio networks. He helped create radio network for Iowa State, the Cyclones, and for Oklahoma State. And he gave me a lot of insight. So that kind of, using that education kind of gets us to where we are now, if you will.
So you find your way back working with Bob Sullins again at Mix 96, open up here in town. Now, the next step I want to talk through is where we kind of merged or remerged, and that was with the creation of the Southeastern Sports Network. We just finished up our first 5 years together doing this. Talk a little bit about you and Bob really spearheaded this effort and created what was at the time and still is comparably maybe the best network at our level in Division II.
I'll say this: it's certainly the best in the Great American Conference, just by sheer land mass alone on the radio side of things. And it wasn't a new idea. I remember you and I had conversations when I was working at Griffin, because once I started doing, we did, like I was saying earlier, did a ton of state football championships at Boone Pickens and did a lot of state basketball championships where we had these games that were going out over the internet, but were also simultaneously being picked up by these radio stations across the state. And I saw an opportunity there. And, we talked about it a little bit. I'm glad my first attempt at the network didn't play out. The reason I say that is because once we hit a point, and I wasn't even working at Mix 96 then. I was not an employee of Keystone Broadcasting. Mix had been on the air for about 6-7 months maybe. I can tell you exactly, I can't tell you the date. I can tell you what was on the TV. San Francisco 49ers were playing the New York Giants, the NFC Championship game, and I'm sitting in my recliner, and Bob and I hadn't talked in 4 or 5 months. I mean, we talked, but it's different when you're working with someone every day and then you go and you do your thing. And Bob calls me up out of the blue and says, if you were going to do Southeastern, how would you do it? And I said, well, and at that time, Keystone Broadcasting only had 3 stations, not 4, and now we have 4. I said, well, we've got 3 stations. I said, and Will Payne's a good friend of mine, and Payne's got stations to the east, and he's got Southeastern ties. I'm sure there's a way we could work it out. I said, we flagship it from Durant just like you would any other network, and you have it on in Ardmore, and you have it on in Atoka, and you have it on in Hugo, and you go from there. And that little conversation, it took another 3 years to see that to fruition. And there were some things that came along that I think helped that out. Going into, you kind of fast forward to the end of the summer, and at that point in time, Mix had been on the air for almost a year. Bob starts calling me up. He knows I'm not happy in my situation. There were a lot of things that had changed. Griffin no longer owned Coach's Aid. I was kind of looking for a way out. Bob calls me once. I just kind of shrug him off like I do sometimes. He called me again. And then eventually I came back to work here. And, we get through that first year. And at the time, our station over in Ardmore was doing Plainview football and was leasing a tower because we have the rights to Ardmore football. And the group that they were dealing with decided to yank the lease. And there was a discussion over how do we get this, how can we keep doing Plainview? We don't have a radio signal. Well, we had already been dabbling in video streaming at Coach's Aid. And I go, we stream it. We promote it like crazy on radio and we stream it. And, you fast forward, and that was key. I still say that was key, and I give Bob a ton of credit for that, because having the wherewithal to dive feet first into that, and now have it at a point where, we we radio and video Atoka, Colgate, and Ardmore, but then we've got additional schools that are video only, and it gave Bob a lot of opportunity. It's one thing about Bob. Bob will like focus and learn. He's very technical driven, and you know, last year it's kind of sad. The Oklahoma Association of Broadcasting opens up video streaming as an award category, and we win the dang thing. And we can't go get the award because of COVID-19. But I like to think that I do a lot with it on the play-by-play side of it. But anything that someone sees video-wise that we do, I mean, that's Bob's show. But I think that combination of my want for a radio network, along with his due diligence and trying to get the video as solid as possible, it makes for a good marriage between the two. And I think it gives Southeastern a product that, in my opinion, and you know me, I'm not the raw guy. I really think that that's one thing that is the envy of the conference. I don't think anyone else has anything close to that. I know there's school that has more radio stations, but they don't cover the same landmass. I mean, you can pick up a Southeastern game from Lawton, Oklahoma to DeQueen, Arkansas on game day. You can pick it up from, north of Sanger, Texas, all the way to Moore, Oklahoma on a game day. From Van Alstyne to Tallahena, from Paris to New Boston. I mean, when you look at that, it's actually landmass-wise larger than the University of Tulsa's radio network. And then the video, even though we're only able to do it on home games, Bob has made a pretty big investment in making that. And I'm not just the equipment, but the time. The guy spends a lot of time trying to figure out things to make it smoother, make it better. And it's been fun. It's been fun so far.
Well, I would certainly say that the team up between you and Bob and the other people who have pitched in along the way and been part of it, you mentioned Will Payne and his stations, all the people who have come in and worked with you guys have created, just like you said, the envy of the conference. Like you said, nobody covers. I mean, we like to divide Oklahoma up.
And I'll say this. I think that I got to say thanks to former President Sean Burge and Athletic Director Keith Baxter, because the reason I say that, we had an idea, but it was still an idea. You get to now, everybody's video streaming. I mean, everybody's doing some form of something. But it's amazing how much technology changes and how quickly it changes. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been doing this. And we were going into year 6 this year before the plug got pulled. It takes a lot of guts to look at something and go against what you have done for 30 years. And by making that switch to see the vision that Bob and I kind of had and trust us with it, kudos to those two guys, because without them seeing what we knew, then we're not having this conversation right now.
Absolutely not. And, not only that, but the way you guys have taken that ball once the move was made, then to build on it and to turn it into what it's become today as we enter our second agreement, heading into year 6. I just want to transition a little bit. You mentioned, getting the opportunity to pick up your award because of COVID-19. That's just a small thing. However, as I've talked to everybody across this series, COVID's had a big effect on a lot of people. Talk a little bit about how, on your day-to-day, it's affected you. Well,
on our end, and a lot of people don't realize this, I always think it's funny. People are like, and I get it. the radio is always there for you. You turn it on, it's in your car, it's always there. Someone has to pay for these lights above my head. And so, advertising is how that is done. And, you asked the question earlier about the coaching aspect. There are still things within that regard that I have to, that I take. One, I'm a sales manager. So in, small staff, how can I get the most out of each player I have? And then the second thing is when you're looking at marketing and you're talking to clients, you have to get them. I've never been the hardcore sales guy. It's just not my approach. I know guys that, they could literally close any deal. But my approach has always been, let's find an idea that works for you and then run with that idea and really make that idea into a concept, something that are a set of building blocks, something that a business can build and hang its hat on rather than just trying to throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And so you asked about the coaching thing a little bit ago. I have to get clients to see my vision for their business and how we can help connect them with customers. You ask about COVID, what it's affected, what the one thing that's great about here in Durant is we're not completely isolated, but we're a little bit insulated. So, I know people in Dallas have really, really struggled with this, way more so than we have. And that's what I mean by insulated. Here, our economy, I had a bank president tell me this, and I agree. Our economy doesn't do this here. It's more like this. And, sometimes that's a good thing. And with COVID, that has been kind of a good thing. And so clients have been receptive. They understand what we're all going through. They understand the need to market. That's still a need. The one thing that's been challenging ultimately is, one, the constant moving of the goalpost, if you will, to use a sports analogy. We're going to have season on this day. Now we're going to have season on this day. Now we're going to cancel this. Now we're going to, so there's clients that I meet with, 3 times a year, a whole year, that I've met with 3 times in 3 months, because it's as soon as we get a plan in place, here comes this other curveball. And so you're constantly, it's kind of constantly thinking on your feet. The other thing that's a little bit difficult is, having clients that are lifelong clients and realizing that, the bottom line with the whole coronavirus deal is the government can say we're open, but then it comes down to the business owners. Are they willing to open and take that? And then finally, the last person and really the biggest person to make the decision is the consumer. The consumers are the ones that drive everything. I can open up Mix 96.1 to public consumption all day long. That doesn't mean people are going to come in here because they may not feel that way. Again, we're a little bit insulated being in a smaller town, not being in a city. But it has been challenging. I mean, and not even just from that, it's goofy things. Like I had a meeting with a client this morning who is being told that her particular product, she's not going to get her product until the new year. She's had this stuff ordered since June. I had an ad schedule here a couple of weeks ago that was for like a one-time weekend show type event that was canceled not because people couldn't go to the show, the vendor couldn't get the product they were trying to sell. So little things like that have been challenging. But it's just kind of the way things are. I mean, I knew the moment and you and I were on the phone for some of this when the NCAA stuff happened, and how it played out, because you were very integral in that. Initially NCAA says games, no fans. And I call you and I go, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? And you go, I don't know. I'll tell you tomorrow. And then within an hour, you're like, okay, you're good to go. And then the next morning you call me up and say, what time are you leaving? And I go, 1. And you go, don't leave until you talk to me. And then at 10:30, I'm good for the men, but not the women. At noon, I'm good for the women, but the Power 5 is canceling all their conference tournaments. And I told you at that point, I go, I'm not driving 7 hours one way to turn around and come back tomorrow morning. And by 3:30 that afternoon, the NCAA says, boom, it's all off. And you were driving, and I text you, and I go, well, that's that. And you're like, yep, that's that. And so literally from that moment in mid-March, I feel like every week has had at least one day like that. There's always been one day in the week, and it's like, it doesn't matter. It could be a Friday, it could be a Monday, it could be a Wednesday, but there's always one day where it feels like just all hell breaks loose for a minute. And then we get back into the same pattern of stuff. And, until we get it, until there's a vaccine or a good treatment for it, this is what we're going to be dealing with. I'm comfortable with it. I can handle it. I can't say it's been necessarily easy, but I've become accustomed to it at this point.
Well, yeah, and I can certainly remember Joplin, by the way, was how far I got before we ate lunch and turned around and came home in March. And it does feel like it's been kind of, every week, every couple of weeks, there's those days where there's a false start or a hiccup. So I can certainly see where you're coming from. I want to thank you for stopping by today. First of all, I want to make sure I say this while you're here, and we talk about it all the time, but I want to publicly thank you guys for the work you do in getting Southeastern athletics out there and for the coverage you give. I know, as you mentioned, coming along, you've had a long tie to this university. I know, I don't know if it's necessarily the end-all job you wanted, but I know there's been a time when you really wanted to be the voice of the Storm. Or the voice of the Savages at one point, but the voice of the Storm now. And,
I'll say this. Everybody has a dream job. And, obviously I have mine. There are basically 4. And this is one of the 4. Like, the thing of it is I've seen so many things at this university. I remember watching Crystal Robinson at Old Bloomer whenever I was in the 8th grade. One of my best friends that I lived with in college was an All-American. He's on the wall inside the men's locker room area. So from my standpoint, I can't imagine a role that's any better. Like, I get to go to work at a university that I know so much about, and that helps me a whole lot. I'm not having to, there's things that I can pluck out of the air that otherwise I wouldn't know had I not witnessed it, and there's things I know you keep the records at Southeastern. There's things that we witnessed in our time at college that don't go into record books. But there's things that happen like Romar Crenshaw and different things like that you can pull out of your memory bank when you're in the course of a game, and knowing that guys your age who went to college with you are listening and watching, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. So that to me is the cool part of this job.
Well, Jay, again, I'd like to thank you for stopping by today and catching up. Like I said, you don't get to get on that end of the microphone very often, or that end of the interview. So I appreciate you stopping by. As we close up, I want to thank First Texoma National Bank for sponsoring the SC Check-In. Jay, one more time, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Be safe.